الله أكبر الله أكبر.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. My dear respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. You sound like it's iftar time. Assalamu alaikum. Wa alaikum. MashaAllah, jazakallah khair. So we are trying in this month with Qurtuba to have some varied topics, inshallah. And one of them that we had been giving a khutbah about most recently was on the topic of social justice. So we thought in a khutbah it's only about 20-25 minutes that you have a chance to speak. So we wanted to elaborate slightly more on what does Islam say about social justice, and indeed how is the society itself set up within Islam. So I'll do a few things. I'll begin by tracing basically the concept of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created mankind, given us perfection, if you will, from the beginning, and then how each and every one of us is responsible to be just in our individual lives, and then how that lends itself to the discussion of social justice. So to begin with, the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam reminds us that he said that every child is born in a state of fitrah. That every child is born in a state of fitrah. And so what that does for us is that it really levels the playing field, where other religions and other theological sort of approaches have put that babies are essentially not born pure, that there is a concept of original sin, that they bear the burden of the sin of their forefathers. In Islam, no child is given that. Every child is given an open access to a pure life. And so that hadith reminds us that indeed every child is born in a pure state, regardless of their racial, ethnic, socioeconomic background, the lineage, the family to whom they were born. Regardless of all of that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it so that this was the gift, if you will, given to humanity. In the Quran itself, in Surah At-Teen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ التَّقْوِيمِ, that indeed we have created mankind, human beings, in the best of molds. And by, again, virtue of our own actions. Not because of the way Allah willed it, but because of our own actions. ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ, that indeed by our own behaviors we then sink to the lowest of the low. And that's important, because where that leads us to is this idea that within our own lives, if we are not being just, if we are not exercising fair transactions and fairness in relationships, then all the discussion about social justice is basically something superficial. It's something that it doesn't really even matter anymore, because the society is built on families, and families are built on individuals. So if the individual is strong, the family is strong, and every family is strong, society is strong. And so the connection is very clear, and indeed is very deep. And so we, as Muslims, have a big burden on our shoulders to share with the rest of the world that indeed, if you enter this religion, or if you accept to be a Muslim, that you are basically being given this outlook on life whereby you have to work hard to maintain purity, as opposed to in other theological frameworks, you are born in sin, and then you have to try to get out of sin and approach purity. And for the young people in the audience and those who are in school, this would be the equivalent of what a GPA stands for, the cumulative grade point average. That in Islam, you are born with a 4.0, and then you have to do something to mess it up by missing classes, not doing your homework, not doing well on exams, all of the things, the ibtila that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about. So the 4.0 is a big deal. So you're born with that, and then you have to work hard to go away from it. Whereas in other religions, you're born with a 0.0, and you have to work your way up. And that's why most people don't even bother anymore, because they say, well, what's the point? I'm going to have to go from 0 to 4.0. Doesn't make sense. So we are all in that framework. So What that does is leads us to the concept of relationships. So once you know that the individual is born in fitrah, that indeed we are created in the best of molds, that we have the choice, the agency, the power of choosing between right and wrong, then where does that put us? It puts us right in the heart of a relationship. That means my relationship with my parents, beginning with children. For husbands and wives and spouses, the relationship with each other. And every one of those relationships is predicated on some form of order. That you have roles and you have responsibilities. Nobody can just come in and say, today I'm going to be the husband, or tomorrow you're going to be the wife, or tomorrow you're going to be the oldest child. You just know how things are. The first child that's born, that's the oldest child, boy or a girl. The husband is the man. The wife is the woman. And in the reality of it, roles and responsibilities, if we follow that logic, then those roles and responsibilities, if I fulfill them with fairness and equity and justice, then the social order is being formed right in the heart of the family. If I violate that, then the social order is already beginning to disintegrate. Then I cannot go out of the home and talk about fighting for social justice, and in my home there's injustice because of the way I'm not fulfilling the roles and responsibilities. And so this becomes, a very critical aspect that leads us to, so what is central to these relationships? What keeps these relationships moving? One of them is the roles and responsibilities. Allah is the creator, we are the creation, and so we know the connection between Him and us. Then, between husbands and wives, parents and siblings. But what's important is, what's connecting all of these things are values. Are values. And in the Quran, there are many transcendent values that are given to us that every society, no matter where you're from, nobody will disagree that this is something unique and something that we should be striving for. Nobody will disagree. So for marriage, to even begin the family life, in Surah Ar-Rum, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about 3 very critical values that describe a relationship. That He says, and there are those who know, from every marriage khutbah, this is recited, Surah Ar-Rum, this verse is recited, unless the khatib either forgets, the imam conducting the marriage forgets, or somehow just doesn't emphasize it enough. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُمْ مِنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا. That among His signs is that He has created from your own souls, in Surah Ar-Rum, your mate, your other half, if you will. لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. That you may dwell with them in tranquility. So the first value, critical value, is that that relationship has to be described by, characterized by a sense of tranquility. Sakina. لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. And that's why even in the Arabic language, you ask someone where they live. Where they live is the root of tranquility. Where do you live? Wain sakin. Where do you live is the root of where do you dwell? Where does tranquility reach you? It's not on the road with the difficulty of travel and all of the burdens of it. It's at home. لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. You may dwell with them in tranquility. Second part of that says, وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ. We have bestowed between you mawadda and rahmah. Compassion and mercy. So in a society, in a home, where tranquility is missing, where compassion and active love is missing, rahmah, mercy is missing, then you start to have the preconditions of injustice. Because somebody is feeling that tranquility is not my domain. That home is not where I can feel at peace. And you know this from the life of the Prophet ﷺ, when the first verses were recited to him by Jibril alayhi salam. He had been sitting in the cave, reflecting on the life of everyone around him in Mecca, and literally thinking, why is there so much injustice? Why are they the powerful oppressing the weak? Why are those with wealth oppressing those without wealth? Why are those who are in power to be mothers and fathers literally destroying the life of a baby girl because of ignorance? He was reflecting on these things. When the verses came to him, اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق, what does he do? He doesn't get up and rush to his best friends. He had them. He had companions at the time. He doesn't rush to his business associates saying, I don't think I can do business anymore. My head is all messed up. I feel like someone is talking to me. No, he runs back to where? Where does he leave? He goes to his home. He goes to his home. لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. Because at home he knows that Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha will be the one who welcomes him, gives him that sense of tranquility because it's been shifted. Something has happened and he needs to get his compass, his bearing, as your GPS will tell you, you're off course, rerouting. And for him, the route is straight back home, go home. So those values are critical in a family, and as much as they will describe to us how we deal with society. Because if tranquility is missing at home, we will not want it for anybody else. If tranquility is missing for you and I, we don't really care if anybody else has it. So this means, what about the homeless? The Ibn Sabil, the people of the road. What about those who are in shelters now because of domestic violence and other forms of abuse, and they don't know where to run to? All tranquility has left them, escaped them. And then, of course, what about compassion? What Dr. Omar Farooq Abdullah says is an active love. Compassion is not just feeling with emotion for someone, it's an active love, going to them, trying to improve their condition, especially for husbands and wives. And of course, rahmah, mercy, is at the heart of all of this. So that social order is built on these values. And what's amazing is that we Muslims have all of this as a part of our religion. Not only have we misunderstood our own faith, but people outside of our faith have misunderstood us. So when you say Islam, they don't think tranquility. When you say Islam, they don't think compassion. When you say Islam, they don't think mercy or rahmah. They think everything opposite of that because of what's being shown to them, talked about to them, expressed to them, and we are the latest to come on the scene to say, no, that's not what Islam is about. And so what that brings me to is, how then is society to be set up? How then, if these are the basic values of a family and a home, how is society to be set up? Well, the larger values are what? What are some examples of larger values? They said it's a classroom, so it's supposed to be engaging you. What are other values that we know that exist between human beings? What are, between societies? What are things we value in society?
Other than family?
Yeah, other than family, in addition to family. What are some other values that we have? Generosity, yeah. Yeah, one of them, yeah.
Amana, trustworthy.
Trustworthiness, yeah. Being trustworthy, yeah. What else? Kindness, yeah. Right? So the idea is what? All of these, what I said, is anything about them only Muslim? No. Every society values these things. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already said that if you have these values, if you are basically, if I've created you in the best of molds, you have the potential to have these values and to live up to these values. You have it. But what we've mistranslated is this concept of taqwa that is in the root of justice, the root of establishing justice. And we've often said, and you read it in the translations, that taqwa is what? What do you normally hear the word taqwa to mean? God-fearing, right? Fear has been emphasized much more. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very exact in the Quran, very exact. If He wants to talk about fear, He says what? وَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. That neither shall there be fear upon them, nor shall there be grief. But then in the Quran itself, it says what? كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ السِّيَامِ. That fasting has been prescribed upon you. كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ what? لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. So that you may achieve God consciousness. It's not fear, because who would say to you, fast, so that you can achieve fear of Allah? It doesn't even fit. But in Ramadan, what it does is, if I'm not eating, if I'm not drinking, if I'm abstaining from all the human desires, I'm achieving a higher sense of consciousness. And when taqwa is missing, injustice prevails. Do you see the connection? When taqwa is missing, injustice prevails. And that's why, in the Arabic language especially, when two brothers or anyone are getting upset with each other, or little bit angry with each other, they say, ittaqillah. They say, show self-restraint by sort of gaining your consciousness that Allah is in charge, that Allah is most powerful. Not fear Allah, because fearing is there. To have khawf of Allah is there, to be afraid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but that's His ghadab, His wrath. But rahmah prevails. So when you have consciousness, it's the root of justice. Because I can't even begin to talk about the hunger of someone else if all I care about is my stomach. I can't talk about the lack of wealth of someone else if all I care about is my wealth and my livelihood. I won't even care. And this is exactly why the beginning verses, and we start to move towards that, came in a pattern that set up three things. From the seerah, the life of the Prophet ﷺ, you find three things that happened that led to each other, one to another. That he exhibited tremendous consciousness. Tremendous consciousness. Even before he was told to be that he was going to be a prophet, everybody knew that this man cares about everybody else around him. This man is the most honest man. This man is the one that's most trustworthy. As-Sadiqul Amin. All of these things were known to him. The most kind, the most fair. All of these things are known about him, and yet what happens? That he is the one that ultimately embodies this, lives it, and then brings it out. That consciousness does what for him? The consciousness lends itself to concern. Because when I'm awake and alert and able to perceive what's happening around me, hopefully the condition of others will lead me to be concerned. If I'm not concerned, if my heart is not moved, then I'm not ready to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That I don't think that Allah is actually in charge. That I don't think Allah is actually watching. That there will come a day when I'll have to stand in front of Allah and say, why didn't I care for the orphan? Why didn't I care for the poor, the miskeen? Why didn't I care for the homeless and the hungry and all of that? And you know, the Meccan surahs are filled with the concepts of social justice. All the Meccan surahs, the short ones, all start talking about the people saying, develop consciousness, learn that there is a creator. Develop concern, know that the people around you are a part of your society, your larger humanity, and you have to do something to improve their condition. And know that it has to be a lifelong commitment. Consciousness leads to concern, concern shifts into commitment, and that's precisely what was missing from those people who denied the messenger and denied the message of the Prophet. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about them, أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ. Look to the person who denies the day of judgment, denies the day of reckoning. What are the characteristics? What are the characteristics of that person? فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدُعُ الْيَتِيمِ وَلَا يَحُدُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, if you look to the person who's not conscious of their responsibilities, hasn't developed concern, and has no commitment, that person doesn't think they'll ever be held responsible in front of Allah. So look to that same person. The same person will be the one that pushes away the poor, the miskeen, the orphans, and will deny the feeding of the poor. Will deny the feeding of the poor. And subhanAllah, these three things are reflected in the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's there. And going back to taqwa, it was not just that Muslims had to develop taqwa. That among mankind, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, that if you exercise self-restraint, you will not set up prejudicial, discriminatory, sort of oppressive laws and policies, so that some part of society is below and other part of society is high. And that's in Surah Al-Hujurat, the verse that literally ends with, again, taqwa, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, to addressing all of humanity, Ya ayyuhan nas, inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha. O mankind, know that we have created you from a male and a female. وَجَعَلْنَا جَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلٍ. That we have divided you into nations and tribes. Why? لِتَعَارَفُوا. Consciousness lends to concern. لِتَعَارَفُوا means that even if the Burmese, the people of Burma, the natives who are the Rohingya people of Myanmar, are the ones being literally, systematically annihilated from their own lands, then somebody, Even if you're not of Burmese or Rohingyan descent, you should show concern. And in this one, لِتَعَارَفُوا, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says the most beautiful thing, that the most noble, the most respected of you in the sight of Allah, إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ. That the most noble in the sight of Allah, because what were people doing? They were setting up standards and saying, if I have all of this wealth, I'm closer to God. Or if I achieve this much, I'm closer to God. If I have this skin color, I'm closer to God. If I have this height, I'm closer to God. If I'm from this lineage, I'm closer to God. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, all of that doesn't matter. For me, what matters is that you've achieved taqwa, God consciousness. And through God consciousness, to be able to exercise self-restraint. And so, what that brings us to is really the concept of social justice, beginning with the individual being just in their lives, in their families, and that justice spreading, if you will, to society, and a just society being able to set up a framework, if you will, where every single person who wants to be a part of that society will be able to enjoy the benefits of that society without any discrimination or any form of prejudice. So, where does that take us to in terms of actual social justice? So I mentioned to you some of the Meccan surahs. Let me actually refer you specifically to the concept of justice, and you can look up these verses on your own. Surah Ma'idah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about justice very particularly, not necessarily social justice, but the idea of being equitable in society, addressing believers. And this is verses 8 and 9, talking about the reality that even though you may find some hatred in your hearts towards the people with whom you're dealing, do not allow that hatred to move you away from justice. Powerful, very powerful. And if Muslims remind each other this, then indeed all of society benefits, because if we convey the message that this is what our religion is. It's based on the idea that even if I dislike you, and the Quran uses the word hatred, do not let the hatred move you away from justice. أَعْدِلُوا, be just, هُوَ أَقْرَبُ لِلتَّقْوَى. That be just, because that's actually bringing you back again to what? Taqwa, God consciousness. That again, if you want to achieve that, it comes from, subhanAllah, that same way. So, in Surah Al-Fajr, one of the amazing things about this surah is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does show us societies and individuals, nations and individuals are not above being tested by Allah and then held accountable for their behavior. And you know, in Surah Al-Fajr, the Ad are talked about, they were one people. The Thamud were talked about, they were a nation. And an individual was talked about, which was whom? Firaun, right? Firaun was talked about. So here are two nations, the Ad and the Thamud, the people. And then here is Firaun. The common thing among all of them was what? All of them had done what? الَّذِينَ تَغَوْا فِي الْبِلَادِ. That all of them together had transgressed beyond, in their own lands, fil bilad, beyond any bounds imaginable. All of them. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins by telling us that look to the examples of the people. And the Ad, by the way, the Ad had a city, and the Quran talks about Iram as a city. They had built what? Massive, lofty structures. And if you look at other theological traditions, the one way to get closer to God is what? Build the tallest buildings, because everybody sort of understood that God is of high. So to get to God, to get closer to God, you want to go as high as possible, as high as possible. And these people of Ad, nothing stopped them from being destroyed because they transgressed the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Thamud did what? The Thamud went into the rocks, which is still there in the parts of Jordan and other areas. They went into the rocks and actually carved homes and literally an entire civilization inside rocks. Because human beings think what? Rocks are powerful. Rocks, undeniable in terms of strength. So if I carve my life out into wood, fire may burn it. Something else, water may hurt it. But a rock, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says what? Even that didn't prevent them from being destroyed. So as the verses move on, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually brings us to the condition of mankind by saying that the nations were destroyed because they didn't listen. The individual was destroyed because he transgressed all bounds. But then here comes an intimate conversation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing basically mankind, says, and as for the man, essentially who's been honored by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says what? Rabbi akraman. That indeed my Lord honored me. I'm so happy. I'm so happy. Look what Allah blessed me with. Now I can do whatever I want. Basically why? Because I had an ibtila, right? A trial of some kind, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it easy for me, and He blessed me, and He honored me. But what does the man say, and woman, who had the ibtila, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tested them, and in that same, in that next verse, but He says basically that my Lord has done what? My Lord has humiliated me. My Lord has humiliated me. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says what? Before you say that, either Allah honored you or Allah humiliated you, look to see, are you among those who do a few things? And immediately it goes on to say, Kalla balla tukrimunal yatim. No, you are among those, if you felt humiliation or if you felt some kind of artificial pride, you're among those who do not in fact honor the orphans. وَلَا تَحَادُّونَ عَلَى تَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينَ. And that again, you do not encourage one another to feed the poor. Encourage one another to feed the poor. The same one when I recited in Surah Al-Ma'un, right? أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدُعُ الْيَتِيمَ وَلَا يَحُضُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ. Again, you do not encourage the feeding of the poor. And so, if you go on and on and on and look at these verses, here you find out that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is setting it up so that if you want to get close to Him, if you want to have itminan in your heart, if you want to be the soul who really feels content. You know, some of the leaders of the world, at some point in their lives, had no security around them. They would just go with the people. They would actually just walk with the people. Why? Why do you think they could do that? Why do you think they could walk among the people and just feel content without any security? Why do leaders have security? What is it? They're in power, and most often they've done something wrong, oppressed someone, took someone's wealth, or did something where someone is out to get them. And so they need security. And here, what we're talking about is a situation where if you're just, you have nothing to fear. If you're fair, you have nothing to fear. If you're feeding the orphans, encouraging the feeding of the poor, encouraging the treatment of the taking care of the orphans, you have nothing to fear. And indeed, this is where we have to talk about our life in America. That one of the things we're finding now is that not only do we not understand what Islam says about social justice, we are also the last to appear on the scene to address issues of social justice, to actually do something about it. And some people criticized us, said, you know, you didn't used to talk about social justice until after September 11th. As if you wanted to show people, look, we're just like anybody else, we care for people, we are, good people, we're kind people. We're not doing this. Let's be very clear. Nobody is discussing social justice in Islam because it's a publicity stunt. Like we want people to suddenly like us because we say now, look at how just we are. What we're saying actually to each other is let's remind ourselves that this is our religion, that this is our message, that this is what we were supposed to be doing all along. And if we were doing that in America, we should be at the forefront. And this is where I'll discuss some of the issues that, in terms of social justice, that we can talk about. To begin with, we're going through a situation now in America where literally, not only just because of the crash of the economy in 2008, more families are now living under the poverty level than ever before in American history. And to think about what that means, literally, there are children in America, who literally go to bed hungry. In America. there are children and more now families, mothers, mostly single mothers with children, more often than not, who are at this time when the sun sets and we're heading to the masjid for Maghrib, they're heading to a local shelter because at sunset they're allowed to come in. And they can spend the night, but in the daytime they have to leave. And again they're back out on the streets. This is the state of hunger and homelessness in America. And so, more recently, the Farm Bill was being discussed on the floor of Congress. The Farm Bill. This is the bill through which Congress literally funds what is now known as the food stamp program, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP as it's known. Muslims completely absent from the discussion. We should have been at the forefront of saying, this is one program you cannot cut. This is one program you cannot, cut corners on or do away with. You have to be able to say that as a nation, not only do we value every human life, but especially the vulnerable, which are the children and the women who are having to fend for themselves. If you want to study this more, look up this topic more, you can Google the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Because just as the Congress is the representatives and the senators together, the governors have a governors association, the mayors have their own conference, if you will, their own association. And every year, they study about 25 capital cities in America. They rotate it. And every year they put out the status of hunger and homelessness. Now, Muslims, at least one of us, 2 of us, 10 of us in every community should be reading that report, looking up to see where is hunger affecting America the most. What can we do about that? What does our religion say to do about that? Our religion is very clear. The Prophet ﷺ even said, and he never specified the faith of the neighbor. In many of the traditions, when he addresses the neighbor, he never specified the faith of the neighbor. For example, when he said that he is not a believer who goes to bed with his stomach full, knowing that what? That his neighbor is hungry. He never said the believer goes to bed knowing that the believer is hungry. He said the believer goes to bed knowing that the neighbor is hungry. And here we have to ask ourselves, how much do we know about those who live around us? And you'll be amazed. If you go and talk to the people who are running the food banks, the homeless shelters, there are Muslim families in line to get food. There are Muslim families in line for shelters. And we have to say to each other, and we will talk about the international scene as well, what is it that's going to take us, move us, to develop that consciousness that leads to what? Concern that lends itself to a long-term commitment to do something about it. And that's just one of them. That's just one of them. And you'll be amazed. You know how little it takes to feed families? Volunteering at the food bank, you absolutely have to spend no money. All you have to do is a group of, maybe even your family has 10, 12, 15 members now. Everybody's laughing that more and more our families are getting bigger and bigger. Some of our families number in the 20s and 30s. By the time you add all the extended relatives and in-laws and everybody else, just our families could go. Because you may not be able to coordinate the whole community. We could go and show up at the food banks on Saturday mornings, for example, and say we can donate 2 hours. And you'll be amazed. You'll be amazed. Kraft, Nestle, Procter & Gamble, other major food companies donate to the food bank. You know what kinds of things they send there? This is the shameful part of it. They literally send to these food banks things that you and I would not buy on the shelf because it fell off when it was being loaded by the clerk or the stock person. It fell off the shelf and it's dented. It is dented. Because of that dent, they say, we cannot sell this, people won't buy it. So you know where it ends up? Those boxes of macaroni and cheese and other things that are cartons, because they look a little bit disheveled, some rain has touched the shipment and some color has come off, they literally end up in the food bank. And you can go and you package those things. And you'll be amazed. Families that come to get those bags, they literally get supplies of 2 weeks at a time. And the cut in the SNAP program, the food stamps program, we have evidence to show that families are saying, even with government help, we'll only be able to make it 2 to 3 weeks out of the month. And they've shown videos where a young boy, for example, opened the fridge in the last week of the month, the entire fridge empty. The entire fridge empty. Not a variety of things are not there, there's one kinds of things, just empty. In America. And that can't happen if Muslims are here. If Muslims live in a country, in a community, in a society, that can never happen. It can't happen. If it does happen, then we've lost a sense of consciousness that lends to concern, and we are showing absolutely no commitment to our neighbors, and not even to the Muslim families that I'm talking about. Move to healthcare. Here we have a travesty, because one of the things that we often joke about in the Muslim community is that every mother and father wants their son or daughter to become a what? A what? A doctor. A doctor. And here we have a situation where Allah is saying to us, you came from a family maybe who didn't even know how to read and write. I gave you a visa to come and study. I gave you a possibility to go to med school. I gave you the possibility to do residency. I gave you the possibility to do a fellowship. I'm giving you the possibility to earn money in incomprehensible ways. $200 to $300 an hour. And all I'm saying to you, by these messages of social justice is, can you set aside 2 hours a week to go to a clinic and say, this is my contribution to this area? 2 hours a week. 2 hours a week. I met a doctor from Afghanistan who still does this. He used to work very hard, and people say to him, why do you work so hard? He worked, we work 5 days a week. He worked 5.5 days a week and barely had any time for anything else. They would say, what is it? Tell us what you're doing. Because he donated a lot. He said, those first 4 days of the week, I work hard because I have a big family to support back home. The 1 day of the week, the 5th day, I used to keep my family going here, and the half day I use for charity. Can you imagine what it takes to divide your life into a portion so that your time is accounted for and reflected in concern? Reflected in concern. So healthcare tells us it's a travesty because 40 to 50 million people in America, you can't even begin to count them because among them are undocumented people. And I'll get to that in a minute. Without health insurance, their primary care provider is the emergency room. Their primary care provider is the emergency room. That's where they go to get help. And imagine how much more it costs. Not only the city, but the taxpayers, if somebody goes as their primary care provider to the emergency room. Because you just know, those are off-hour shifts. People have to be paid more to be able to be present to provide nurses, doctors, all of the health professionals, physicians, assistants. And so there came a law, a policy that was into place, Affordable Care Act. This is not an advertisement for it. But Muslims, again, should have been at the forefront of saying, if people are uninsured, let us do something to help them get insurance. That's social justice. If somebody has a pre-existing condition, and they're not able to get health insurance because of a pre-existing condition, that's an injustice. So how do you prevent that? How do you fight that? What can we do about it? And so this was the dialogue. And health clinics are going up, alhamdulillah, around the country. Even in our area here, in Maryland. The oldest ones that are most commonly known are the Ummah Clinic in California. So I invite you to study how they came into being. How did they come about? A few students, medical students from UCLA, in the middle of the riots after the Rodney King verdict that came out, way back. This is probably before much of consciousness of what the community was doing, and that's what they did. The University Muslim Medical Association. Today, if you visit the website, not only were they honored on the floor of Congress with a resolution by their local congresswoman, but literally, Jews, Christians, people of no faith, other faiths, and Muslims our doctors and residents working side by side to provide healthcare for South Central LA, a place that had been long forgotten by most of America until the riots erupted. So it's not impossible, it's possible. Iman, the Inner City Muslim Action Network in Chicago, is now branching out and developing other smaller entities around the country. Iman has a free clinic, has the possibility for people to come with dignity and get health care, at least get treatment. I can go on and on and on. But bottom line will be that social justice is not somebody else's domain, it's our domain, your domain, and my domain. Internationally speaking, look at the condition of Syria. Look at the condition now of Burma and the Rohingya people that I mentioned. Who talks anymore about Kashmir, but nothing has changed there? Who talks anymore even of the people of Chechnya? Not much has changed there. Who talks about Somalia? There's still not a firm government in place. Who talks about the madness of injustice in Bangladesh in terms of the tribunals and the recent verdicts, literally ending in taking the life of a man in his 90s on false charges from 50 years ago. All injustices. And you and I have only a few things to do. One, choose a cause. Just choose a cause. We can't do everything. Nobody can do everything. But choose a cause. Read about it. Learn about it. Then consciousness develops for you. Then help somebody else become conscious about it. Help them develop concern from that. Go to people and say, by the way, had a very difficult weekend. Why? What happened? We got news, Do you know the people of Rohingya? They'll talk to you, because just as much as they talk to you about the Browns and the Cowboys and the Redskins and everything else, let them know that, yes, I'm also watching football and enjoying things in life, but I'm also concerned by all of these other things that are going on. They'll come to you and tell you about other things. Why can't we? The power, again, in the last of these things, with dua. See, social injustices will prevail. But to bring justice, every one of us has to think, when is the last time we just sincerely stopped as a community and just made dua and dua and dua? And the most popular night of Ramadan is when Sheikh Samiullah or any of our Huffaz lead us in the end of the Quran, with the finishing of the Quran, in the dua. The most number of people come that night for dua. But dua is not only in Ramadan, only on that night of finishing of the Quran. It's something of every human being. Every individual can make dua. And injustices have been removed again and again throughout history. When people got together and said, we can't change everything. We may not be in charge, but He is in charge. And He never denies the true believer the request. And we have to ask ourselves, when have we sincerely made dua for the betterment of people in America, around the world? And I know I've left out at least one country that somebody is sitting here thinking, why don't they mention this country? I don't mean to do that. We could list all of them. When I was growing up in the 80s, if you came to our masjid to listen to the dua in Jummah prayer or in Ramadan, they would list literally like 10 to 15 nations. And they had gotten to a point where they would rhyme the nations for the sake of the dua, to feel as if it's like a flowing dua. They would literally, but it was a painful situation. So now we just get politically correct and we don't make dua for anything. We don't even want to say the word mujahideen fi kulli makan in the dua. We don't even say that anymore. We modified that because we think people are going to be so afraid of us if we make dua for those who are, fighting injustice around the world in a fair way, in an equitable way. Right? So I'll stop there, inshallah, and if you have any comments or questions, we can take that, and then I know we're going to break for Isha. So just say anything I said that you want clarification, or any resources that I mentioned that I can repeat, inshallah.
I'm sorry, I stepped off. Did you mention the case of Burma?
Yeah, I did. And again, as a community, we had brought attention to the suffering of the people of Burma, specifically the indigenous people known as the Rohingya people. And they are indigenous. There's absolutely no doubt about that. They have been there for centuries. And the new policies are denying them their citizenship, They've essentially stripped them of the right even to have basic rights of marriage, offense of 10 years if somebody among them marries, and are being forced out of their ancestral lands, systematically being denied human rights, let alone if they live and they survive. But many of them have actually died. Similarly, for the situation in Syria, no sign of improvement. And this coming weekend, there is going to be not only a rally, but also a fundraising, event for Syria. All of this is going on, and I'm not, saying anything new to most of us because we're on email, we're on the internet, we see things. But at some point, we have to ask ourselves, if that consciousness is not there, what's the problem? If it's not there, what's the problem? If I can talk to my children about everything under the sun, why don't I stop and talk to them about some of this suffering? Not only in America, but around the world. And if I don't do that, then when will they ever know? Because they are in danger of another way. They're in danger of growing up so content, so complacent, so oblivious that there's any suffering, that they will actually assume that their life in America is just to basically be a Muslim and not have to worry about anybody else. This is exactly the opposite of what the Prophet ﷺ did. Even after he became a Prophet ﷺ, he said, because this made an impact on people, if I was invited to join, when he wasn't a Prophet yet, he was a part when all of oppression was there, and people got together and said, we have to have an alliance of virtue, known as the Hilf al-Fudul, that we have to have this alliance to make sure to protect the vulnerable. After becoming a Prophet, he said, ﷺ, if I was called to join that, I would still join that. Meaning what? That it wasn't the end of life. Just because now we're Muslims and we've established the religion, that even if there's oppression of anybody else, we would join them and be a part of that. And I'm telling you, one of the amazing things that's going on in America is that more Americans are discovering Muslims. For the first time in a long time, more Americans are discovering Muslims. Why? Because through gatherings like this, more Muslims are discovering Islam. And they're able to express themselves, talk about their religion, convey the message in a way that doesn't have to be in your face, doesn't have to say to them, convert. That's the last of your worries. Hidayah, the guidance, is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if we stand up for social justice, believe me, when this last hurricane and the storm came in New Jersey and New York, that just literally less than a year ago, people who are not Muslim, when Muslims showed up to them to help them in their homes, to give them assistance, they literally shed tears on camera, saying they had never known this about Muslims. So why wait until it becomes that condition? Why not go to people in the best of times, and of course show up in the worst of times, and then complete the message and says, we are here for you. We are here for you. And we're not going to abandon you ever. And then let some Muslim behave in an unjust manner, either through an act of terror, here or abroad, and you will see every American who is not a Muslim that interacted with an American who is a Muslim will stand up and say, not the Muslims. This is not the Muslims. This is not the Islam that I know. And if you look at the polls and the surveys, every single time, it shows a high number for people who say Islam is negative, Islam is incompatible with America and with democracy. The next question they ask them, do you know any Muslims? Have you interacted with Muslims? Inevitably, they say, no, I don't know much about Islam, and no, I have not interacted with Muslims. So it's up to us now to show up and to do this. And a couple things we can do. The Thanksgiving Thursday is a blessing in America, because many people who usually go hungry find that everybody wants to be charitable. I say, let's take that Thursday, apply the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ to that Thursday, and turn it on its head. Turn it on its head so every American who is suffering says, I can't wait for Thanksgiving, because those Muslims go crazy with their generosity. What do we do on Thursdays and Mondays as a Muslim? out of love for the Prophet ﷺ, what do? We fast. Imagine if on that day it spreads across America that you won't find those Muslims stuffing their faces until they can't even move anymore, so the only thing they can do is watch football. You'll actually find them serving people all day long while they fast. And at the end of their breaking of the fast, whatever they've saved from not eating, they've already donated. And whatever they eat is modest. And it shows concern first. Turn it on its head. Turn it on its head. And you'll be amazed how things work out for us, inshallah. So there are many things we can do. You know, Mother's Day is a holiday, but there's so many mothers on that day who are desperate for even some company. Some of them are terminally ill in hospitals where even their own children may not be visiting them. Elderly who are without visitors. Elderly who are without company of just someone reading a book to them, someone just talking to them for a few minutes, serving them some food. All of these vulnerable populations are our populations. They're not that society, they're our society. And you'll be amazed. If you have a difficulty in life, if you go and serve others, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a most amazing way will open up for you doors that you've never imagined. Incomprehensible in terms of how assistance will come to you. You don't go with that intention. You don't go to feed someone for the sake of reward or thanks. You go to them seeking the countenance of Allah. Seeking the countenance of Allah. And what did I just recite? I just recited verses from the Quran whose meaning are basically what? That إِنَّمَا نُطْعِمُكُمْ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ. That indeed we feed you seeking the countenance of Allah. لَا نُرِيدُ مِنْكُمْ جَزَاءً وَلَا شُكُورًا. That we feed you seeking the countenance of Allah. We seek from you neither reward nor gratitude, nor thanks. That's why I say to people, when you go to these places and you're serving people, it's okay to put aside the camera. It's okay if nobody knew you were there. It's okay not to have the instant tweet with a picture showing, look where I am. It's okay. If nobody records it, Allah has recorded it. If nobody knows it, Allah knows it. And if nobody knows it from society, the people you served know it. When they see our faces showing up to serve them. And you'll be amazed. After all of the tragedies of the last decade, in America and around the world, Islam is still on the rise. People are still wanting to know more. More people are becoming Muslim. More people are reading this book of Allah and trying to get closer to the message of Islam. Among Latinos, you've seen stories about that. Among Native Americans, you should start seeing stories about that. Of course, among African Americans, it's been a long time. Among white Caucasian Americans, among all minorities, people who feel somehow let down by society, they turn to Islam. We have to be there to be able to show them the message and say to them, we will not let you down. Join with us, and inshallah we'll all do it together and improve society together. So I'll stop there, inshallah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless every one of us, to help us to develop that consciousness, inshallah, that lends itself to concern and commitment, to help us indeed to be among those who serve others seeking the pleasure of Allah, who see an injustice and feel concerned and want to, inshallah, improve the situation and remove that injustice, who will go out and try to do something about with what we learn, and indeed make dua for all of the people not only suffering in America, but around the world. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all of our efforts. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.